I'm Dr. Jillian Lucas Baker. I'm a professor, a wife, and a mom, and I've struggled with fertility issues.
I'm Sonora Joy Allwood, a holistic nurse, health coach, entrepreneur, wife, and mom. And I've also struggled with fertility issues.
I'm Raelle Hamilton Romeo. I'm a PR executive, a storyteller, and an adjunct professor. I'm a mom and a travel enthusiast, and I've struggled with fertility issues.
Welcome to A Tribe Called Fertility.
With that, I'd like to introduce our guest, Shawnee Benton-Gibson. Shawnee is a healer, speaker, author, and coach. She is also a licensed social worker, co-founder and CEO of Spirit of a Woman, and an activist. Shawnee lost her daughter, Shamony Gibson, on October 6, 2019, at age 30. Shamony passed away due to a pulmonary embolism 2 weeks after giving birth to her second child. Also joining us today is our resident psychologist, Dr. Angela Clack. Dr. Clack and Shawnee have actually known each other for some time, and Shawnee wrote the foreword for Dr. Clack's book, Woman of Color Talk, Psychological Narratives on Trauma and Depression.
It's just surreal, once again, just how that played out. I entered into a intentional conversation about reproductive health when I was doing transformation work on myself. I'm constantly working on my evolution, my expansion, my healing. I use this terminology, and I didn't make this up. One of my trainers, teachers did, but I'm always in a river conversation about my healing. And you never step in the same river twice. So it's always moving and transforming, and I'm grateful. But I got to a point where I started to really look at the pivotal moments in my life that stopped and blocked me from being my fully expressed self, stopped me from being in generative relationships or showing up as my best self in relationships, whether it's intimate partnerships or relationships with my children. And I recognized that those stop moments were connected to me giving birth or being pregnant and then giving birth. What runs in my family on my mother's side is we give birth and then we experience postpartum depression. And with my second daughter, it was postpartum psychosis. And just that darkness, that disconnect, just stayed with me. It lived in my physical body, definitely in my womb, but also in my heart, and the shame of being that way during the times when I was struggling and not wanting to tell anybody what was going on, feeling like they would make me think that I was crazy and
Yes.
that it would be unacceptable. And then the conditioning from family, like you just don't talk about that, right?
Right.
So that period was, for me, was just like this, I'm not the only one, and I need to be talking about this. And because I'm also a performance artist and a writer, I'm just like, I need to use these mediums to create the space to heal and transform. And then the next layer was, I didn't go through this by myself. The second daughter, Jasmine, who was in my womb, I was so depressed when I was carrying her, and that energy transfers. And, she came out, and I was just like in my mind, because I was sick and hormonally imbalanced. I was like, this is not really my baby. It was a traumatic birth. It was a term labor birth. So I was 7 months pregnant. She had a birth defect. She had surgery. She was in the hospital for a month. Nobody asked me if I was all right. Nobody texted me what the date was. My husband, we were both young, so he didn't know to ask. So I was in this state of darkness, and I could have hurt myself and hurt her. Literally, I could be dead, and so could she. I just straight talk. So I
Yes.
would speak to my daughter, who was in this toxic and hostile environment in my womb, and ask her if she wanted to do the work with me, because my entire family, my children are artists. So she writes, she acts, she's a videographer, photographer. So I asked her, do you want to co-create this piece with me, a dramatic piece? And after interviewing many women about their postpartum, we co-wrote a piece called Motherhood Echoes from the Womb. And then we performed it at a Black church. And then after that, when we did a panel discussion, the audience was like, what about infertility? What about miscarriage?
Oh,
What
wow. Okay.
about birth? And 70 some odd year old women were like standing up and saying, I went through this or that, and I've never told the story until tonight, like story after story. So Jasmine and I, which is my daughter's name, we went back to the drawing board and interviewed more women about their reproductive traumas and losses. And all the stories started pouring out. So we wrote more pieces to add to the original piece, which we call a choreo poem. And she wrote original music, and it was just amazing. And one of the pieces that transformed or elevated our relationship was a piece that we did about our own relationship, being in the womb of a woman that doesn't want you, that is depressed and wants to push you out, being so conscious and so spiritual as a baby, like an infant, that you're like, I need to be out of here, that she came early, just like, I need to escape from this. And because of what I believe, like she had her stomach and intestines weren't connected, so she needed surgery. I'm like, my toxicity was so huge on a spiritual level that her digestive system was thrown off of whack, out of whack. So, you can think about the physical, but I always think about the metaphysical, that my stuff was so
Yes.
powerful that it, her digestion, like she couldn't take in what I was giving her full
Right.
disconnect. So we wrote the piece and we performed the extended piece again, and it just resonated with the community. And then I was like, we want to do a conference, and the Motherwick conference got birthed from that experience. So that was in 2011. So even though I was intermittently in conversations about women and babies, I worked in foster care, all of that stuff literally got thrust into the world of reproductive health and reproductive justice, from that experience of just recognizing that I needed more healing, and I was going to invite her and other people like me into the conversation.
That is awesome. And I'm a firm
Yes.
believer in being able to transfer
Oh, yeah.
energy and everything else, especially when you're going through that gestational period that we call pregnancy. That's powerful.
Yeah.
Well, I was thinking maybe we could take a pause for a second and talk about maybe just briefly about postpartum depression, because I've had it myself,
Me too.
with Amari, my last child. Um, really struggled with it. Really struggled with it. Even, now I think women, and especially Black women, still don't want to talk about it or tell their friends or tell their partners. And I knew I had it, and it took me kind of talking to my husband, who basically said, okay, you need to go to a doctor and really get diagnosed, because I think it was maybe 6 months after I had Amari that I was struggling with symptoms that I knew that I had, but I just couldn't just say that I had it. It took a while for me to accept it. So Dr. Clack, and I know Sonora had similar experiences with that too. Why do you think that black women may do that more with not accepting their postpartum and not talking to their family or their partners about it?
The same reason why I started to take more interest in it, because there has been no place for people to have a voice,
Yeah.
where that's acceptable to talk about.
Yes.
And I think when I first started working with postpartum women, they were mostly white women that were referred by primary doctors in the area.
Mm-hmm.
And then a few women of color started to reach out. And that's when I started to realize, like, well, maybe there's more Black and brown women who would use this therapy to work through that if they knew that there was someone that they could readily identify with, who would find it acceptable to say, I don't like who I am. I'm struggling. I don't know what this thing is. My doctor said this, and my doctor wants to medicate me, whatever that is. And so I started to see more and more Black and brown women, and I got more and more interested, because it became, in addition to the narrative of the women who come for other mental health issues, Black and brown, depression, anxiety, trauma, abuse,
Mm-hmm.
that they haven't had a place to have
Yes.
they haven't had a safe space. They're seeking
Right.
safety, but they don't have a place. And so this is a particular, though, area for me, because when you talk about loss and grief, that's a heavy, heavy topic sometimes. And people don't like talk about death anyway. That's not something that people want to talk about generally. When we lose someone, we usually try to tell people, oh, it's okay, pray about it. They're in a better place. We say a lot of nice things. And I think those deep, dark feelings of, I could take my child's life, I want to take my life, is that when they want to share those things, there needs to be a person who can say, this is what that is. This is depression. This is postpartum. And I'm not going to put you in the hospital. I'm not going to condemn you. I'm not going to say you're a bad mom, because that's what women have said to, like, this is the first time I can say this without someone saying, maybe you should go in the hospital, or maybe you should do this or that. So I want to, in some way, set a place for them to feel like it's normal in the sense of what it is, and that it's common for women to struggle with this, and that Black and brown women traditionally have not had a safe space to have these conversations. So it's still part of the stigma that we have continued to kind of fight against, to eliminate the stigma around mental illness and mental health and emotional conditions, and making it okay for Black women to be vulnerable. I think that's just the continuation of the narrative that we're working so hard to shift.
Yeah.
And that we're not super women. We were just talking about that. And we're
Yeah.
not super women even when we are pregnant or after, that we need
Yeah.
support, and we can't do it all by ourselves.
Can I
And I
ask
think
a
that's
I
part
quick
don't
of it.
think.
follow up on that? Sorry, Sonora. Just a quick follow up. If postpartum depression goes untreated, can it develop into something else, like a more what's the word I want to use? Like a more harsher or a
A chronic
different.
condition,
Yes,
chronic.
thank you. Like a more
Mhm.
chronic, like mental illness. Because my sister and I have theorized
Mhm.
that our maternal grandmother probably had postpartum depression. Well, she probably had some type of like mental illness. Probably wasn't anything large. She had our mom, and then my maternal grandfather's family took my mom as a baby, and that kind of sent her spiraling. And then, she met someone, was supposed to get married. She was pregnant. He left her at the altar. And then it was kind of like fissure. And and my sister and I, just hearing the stories from family members, are convinced that she probably had postpartum. And this was in like the 50s in the Caribbean. So you already got like
Oh, we
the
weren't talking
time,
about it.
the
No.
location, and they're like, ain't nothing wrong with you. Like, just shrug it
Mhm.
off kind of thing. And then, you are heartbroken, and you have two babies. One was taken away, and you have this other baby now, and you're like, what do I do? Is it possible that postpartum can spiral out of control into another condition if left untreated?
It can, including psychosis. I think that's the most
Mm.
extreme, psychosis, and then attempts to take one's life, those, or to hurt the baby. I think those are the most extreme forms. And I'm pretty sure, at least the work that I've done, once you get in there very early, so as soon as the mom tells someone that I have this, she gets a really good assessment and she gets support, I'm convinced, I've seen that the trajectory of the illness becomes very shorter. So something that could turn into 4 months, we could get it down to a couple of months, and then we can give her sustained support, not just individual support, community support, get the family involved. If there's a partner, how to help the partner support the partner. Like, there's a lot of different parts to it, but I think the sooner you get in there and help the woman to not feel like this is such a strange thing, that there's just something wrong with me. But if we don't address it, she doesn't have really I don't think she has the support within her to try to figure this out. So she's trying to take care of a baby. She may be raising other kids, and then she's trying to figure out, well, what is this thing that's happening inside of me? And then
Yes.
failure, like, oh my gosh, I'm doing something wrong.
Check.
Like, so many kind of mental, emotional things. But I think it can turn into a pathology like psychosis, where you become, you have hallucinations or delusions, and also attempts that I just can't take it anymore, and then an attempt to take my life. Yeah.
I know I can speak to that. I'm sorry. I know I can speak to that because that's exactly what I experienced. I had a car accident 8 months pregnant, and really didn't feel the effects of it until after I had my son. But I had a traumatic birth experience, was in labor for 50 hours, had an emergency C-section, and I did not sleep that whole weekend that I was laboring. Had him, did not sleep when I had him, kept him in the room with me, and came home, and I was like so sleep deprived that I was borderline psychotic. And when the postpartum hit, because it didn't hit right away, it was kind of like a culmination, like it was just building up. You know what I mean? It
Mhm.
hit actually after he was a year old, and after
Mm.
I stopped breastfeeding. And
Mm.
so when it hit me, I'm thinking I'm way out of the baby blues stage. Like, even as a nurse, like, I'm saying to
Right.
myself, this is not making any sense. Like, why is it hitting now? Like,
A
you know what I
year
mean?
later.
And then I was
Mhm.
happy, like everything was okay around me, you know what I mean? And I couldn't understand why I was sad, you know what I mean? And like, why was I having these thoughts of like, what if I die? I kept
Mhm.
thinking about like, what happens if I die?
Mm.
What happens if I die? And I guess also too, like I lost my job because I couldn't return back because I was still struggling with my disability. So I had a loss of my job, my body also, because I had so many injuries from the accident. And
Mhm.
then I'm trying to take care of the baby. And for me, when you said the family members, because for
Mhm.
me, I kept saying something's wrong to my family, and they're like, no, nothing's wrong. Nothing's
Mhm.
wrong. And I'm like, no, something's wrong. Like something's not right. And on top of everything, my son had a vaccine injury and lost his speech, lost his balance. I lost it. You know, like I literally lost it. Like I was just crying at the drop of a dime. I was always on the edge. And I kept trying to say to my family members again, something's not right with my son. Like I'm showing them videos and I'm like, look, he was talking in 6 months. He started speaking. You know, he had about 30 word vocabulary by the time he turned 1. And I'm like, look, but no one would see it.
Mhm.
And that in itself really pushed me over the edge. Just the fact that people were with me every day, my husband, my mom, you know, and you can't see that something's not right with me, something's not right with this baby. That in itself almost drove me insane. And I'm sharing this to say to any of our listeners that it's really important that we pay attention to the signs. You know what I mean? And if we don't know, but if we can see something's out of the ordinary, you know, hit Google. I thank God that my husband did do that, you know, and he started to look into things and he did start to watch the videos that I kept telling him, you know, look at the videos, look at the videos. I had just been through so much stress that my body, I think I reached my stress threshold and my body just couldn't take it anymore. You know what I mean? And I just like, thank God I didn't like have an actual break where I had to be hospitalized. But I went to a baby shower of all things for my cousin and they saw me and they were like, what's wrong?
Mm.
And I was able to just cry with all my, you know, my cousins and my friends and that, you know, knew me for growing up. And they're like, oh, and they were like, it's okay. Like all moms go through this, you know, and just like really helped like put me back together again, you know, shout out to Jennifer. Cause like I literally saw my girl Jen and I ran in her arms and she was like, what's wrong? You know, we hadn't seen each other in a while because I moved from New York. Like, so it should have been a happy occasion, but I was a mess. But that was like, that saved me. Being able to get around my people, them tell me like, I'm okay. I've been there. This is what you need to do. You may need to go talk to somebody. And there was also support for my husband, for Andrew, you know what I mean? And they were like, get her to go talk to somebody, go with her, you know, to go talk to somebody, you know what I mean? That saved my life. So, and probably my child's life too, you know what I
Right.
mean? So it's so near and dear to me. And when you say like, you know, our family members, especially in our community, I don't know,
Mhm.
you know, we have the biggest stigma in our community when it comes to mental health.
Oh, yes.
But just to say that something's wrong, you know what I mean? Like, no, like, I just kept saying like something's not right. And everyone was like, oh, yeah, right. You know, like that kind of thing. And I'm like, no. And I'm telling you, that in itself really, it really almost made me snap. So I
That
really
dismissive
just,
attitude.
that
Yeah.
dismissive attitude. And I get it. I get that in my Mother's Day or in her Mother's Day, they didn't
Mhm.
even have time to have those type
Oh,
of
Yeah.
emotions.
right.
Mhm.
So I get it. But when I was going through it, like I just needed, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
I needed to be able to just,
A sympathetic ear, an
yeah, and
embrace, like I hear you, I see
something,
you,
you know. So
recognition.
yeah, I just share that saying that. And you know, and I thank God for the work that you two queens do, because we need more sisters and brothers in
Mhm.
mental health.
Mhm.
It helps to be
That's
able
why
to
you
talk to someone who looks exactly like
sisters.
you. Yes, my therapist, shout out to Dr. Lang, but she's Jamaican. woman. My husband's Jamaican. So it was so good for us, for someone to understand the cultural, background and just like everything, you know what I mean? So for me, therapy saved me. I'm like such a proponent. So I'm living for this conversation. Thank you.
All right.
There are a couple of things just so the listeners can get familiar with some of the terminology, and just the actuals about this. That there's a term, perinatal mood and anxiety and mood disorders. But I think they say PMAD, but I'm big on calling things what they are. I'm like, we have all this shorthand. I'm like, call it what it is.
Yes.
I think that's a
Yes.
it's really, it might be a New York thing. I don't know.
Yes, it is. We like to call it out. Yes.
This experience can start during pregnancy, and things that have happened to you before pregnancy can make you more susceptible to postpartum depression or anxiety or mood disorder. So when I went back to reflect on my own dynamic, when I read some of the things that make someone susceptible and you need to check in if you're working with them and like really make sure, I was like the poster child. They could have put my face up against what makes you what makes it a risk factor for you.
Yes.
I'm like, all of it was me. So my age, I was 20 when I had my first child, 21 when I had my second child, the girls, and then Jasmine was born early, but they still would have been close together. I was disconnected from my family. My former husband was a military person. I had experienced sexual trauma when I was younger. And there was mental illness in my family, bipolar disorder and schizophrenia, undiagnosed. Like I'm a clinician, so I'm like, my great grandmother, there was something going on there. And they'd be like, oh, she just ornery. I'm like, no, grandma was not.
Just like Real, you just said that.
Literally.
So my mother, also another factor is if someone in your family, your immediate family or your close family, like your mother or, went through the same thing. My mother had 5 children and with all of them went through postpartum. I don't think my mother ever got balance because of what you just shared. Can this exacerbate and turn into like a critical issue as far as mental health? I believe that is the case with my mom. And now she has a diagnosis and she's on medication. But back then she was a young mom and she was just going through and they were like, oh, Jill, just crazy. That my mother's name is Jill. I'm not saying that about she talking about
awesome.
Like my mom's name
I am crazy too.
Love it.
If someone would have just asked me my history and knew, they would have been like, we need to keep an eye on this girl because I was a girl, brain not fully developed because I discovered it's not 18 that you're fully developed, it's 25 that the brain congeals and gets, so it's just so many levels of danger. I'm 52. Angela, you might know that Will Rogers.
Yep, I remember. Yes.
Help her out because this is not good. The other piece I wanted to say is that postpartum depression or psychosis does not always look the same. People think of, oh, you want to hurt the baby. Oh, you want to kill yourself. When I first had it with my first daughter, it was about being really possessive of her, not wanting people to pick her up and look at her and
oh my God. So I had
it was me.
Because I was like, I didn't want nobody touching my baby.
Yeah,
nobody
showed up and people are thinking it's like, oh, you just somber laying in the bed.
Oh, yes.
About my baby. It didn't last a long time. But all 3 times that I experienced it with my 3 children, it looked different. So I always tell folks, it's like really look at all manifestations. It doesn't look the way that the TV has told us it's supposed to look. A mother holding your baby over the bridge or like
that is helpful
so
because
each pregnancy it will
is
present differently.
That's very helpful because I kept thinking the entire time that I was pregnant that I was going to have postpartum depression because I kept thinking about my grandmother and everybody kept saying to me, you're so career oriented. Like you're not really like a warm, fuzzy, motherly type. And I think that started to play into my head. And that's probably, it's funny that you say like you get possessive because I legit was like, I don't want nobody touching my baby. Like not even her dad. I was like, I don't want you touching her. He's like, well, when can I feed her? I was like, well, I'm breastfeeding. I'm gonna breastfeed till she's 1. So you don't have to wait. Like I literally was like, mine. Mine.
That
That
was
is
me
so
too.
interesting. Okay.
Now
Yes.
I'm not on that team, guys, just because
You know something?
I had twins. So that was not going to happen. So whoever wanted to take them, please take one of them.
I went through that too. I know that a lot of what fueled my possessiveness was because my childhood friend's father had sexually abused her when we were growing up, and I was there a few times, and didn't happen to me, but it almost And so for me, just seeing something like that, being so close up on something like that, it just it stayed with me. You know what I mean? Yeah, it's very traumatic, so.
And so just looking at those pieces, and I wanted to tie this in with the conversation about Shamony too, because I was so concerned about that happening. I never dreamed that she would be in danger of dying as a result of giving birth. I was concerned about her mental health. And when she had Anari, which was my first grandchild, she did well. Like, she breastfed, went right back to school. She was like, I'm finishing my degree. And she did all of those things. And not that that's an indicator that you're not depressed, but she and I just had open dialogue and conversations about that. It never dawned on me, because she was with a midwife, a doula. She exercised during her pregnancy. She studied everything. She took herbs. We were just so vocal. And then I'm in the work. It just never dawned on me that my daughter would be in that type of danger. But when you think about Serena and Beyonce and others that have access, Kira Johnson, she had access, the medical benefits, and all of those other women that had support and covering, and they still didn't make it. It was like, why did I think that? Like, she was a Black girl and a woman, and we're all in jeopardy. And the other thing, and I don't know, Angela, if you study this as much, because this is a new terminology, but weathering.
Yes.
The weathering framework, Dr.
Yes.
Geronimus. Yes. Yep.
Like what we carry, and the epigenetics, like the generational passing down of trauma, and how it changes the brain chemistry. Like, we're all at risk.
Yes.
And I'm sad to say this, but now I'm like, I don't care what you look like, what you sound like, how many people are covering you. When I hear family members or women in my proximity that are pregnant, my antenna go up. You never know when it's going to hit next.
Wow.
Please follow A Tribe Called Fertility on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter. Feel free to DM us with your questions, thoughts, or share your fertility story. For more information on your amazing podcast hosts, please visit www.atribecalledfertility.com. And if you're listening to us on Apple Podcasts, please rate and review us. It really helps the show, and we welcome the feedback. For those of you who are watching us on YouTube, be sure to subscribe to our channel and hit that notification bell so that you know when we're dropping new content.